Well, I was the sixth child of our family and the last one, but born 10 years after number five, so I was a surprise. And my father always used to like to call me that. I was his little surprise. And I grew up sort of in the country. We were near Akron, which is a big city, produced all the tires. Cyberling, who invented the process that they used to take rubber and make it into that, was in Akron, and so all the industry grew up there. So that was very industrial. But out from that into the country where I lived, it was very rural. Streets weren't paved when I was little, and our mail came not by somebody walking around, but a man in a truck who would come by, and everyone had a post box out in front of a big ditch because we didn't have sewers. Everything went out into the ditches in the front. If you mailed a letter, you put a little flag up on it, and then they would know to stop to pick up your mail and drop off your mail. And the same with newspapers and things came that way. So it was quite different. And I went, we were just free. I could just roam wherever I wanted we had about an acre or so of land ourselves. And it was a bungalow, but with a big front porch and a swing. And we used to love to sit on the swing. In fact, we all swang too high. My mom and dad would yell at us, "Don't swing over the banister," because they were afraid we'd fly off into the driveway. And eventually, this is jumping ahead, but eventually in my teen years, my parents were sitting on the swing, and they only ever swung like little tiny bits, and it broke, and they went down. So we all laughed, which was terrible, but there you go, because it broke on them and not us. However, I used to sit on that swing a lot, and we had kind of an area around our house that, because in America we call it a yard, and that's the green place, rather than here where that's the paved place. So the yard was full of grass, and we had a hill that we used to roll down, and a beautiful Japanese cherry tree in the front that came out with pink flowers every springtime. And then beyond that were the fields that we owned. And in the back, my dad used to cultivate that, and we had rows and rows and rows of vegetables, and we had corn and peas and beets and all that kind of stuff. And then we had fruit trees, and we had grape arbor. And my mother spent all of the end of August, all through September, in our basement where my dad had built her another kitchen, and she canned our food all day long that we had then for the whole rest of the year. So we had very little stuff that was bought from the store. The milkman came and delivered milk, just like he did when I first came to this country, but no more. And we also had the coal man would come, because our house was heated with a big coal furnace, and there was a chute in the driveway, in the bottom part, in the basement. We had a big basement. The basement part, and it had like a window, but it became a chute, and the coal man would come every so many weeks and put coal down through there, and he always brought me a lollipop. I just remembered that. And I would get to choose what color I wanted, and he would give me, we watch the coal go into the coal chute. So in the winter months, we always hung all the washing outside. Mom had, probably similar to what they had here, a big machine with a mangle, but she had two great big stationary tubs that she also used to rinse the clothes in. And then in the winter, because it's so cold in Ohio in the winter, we have the Great Lakes there, so we have a really cold effect. We have really hot summers and really cold winters with lots of snow. So you couldn't hang your clothes outside. So she had them all strung up, and they'd be in the basement drying, which they did quickly because that's where the great big furnace was, which always I was afraid of it. I thought it was an octopus because it had all the tentacles that went out to the different rooms to bring the hot air up into the house. So we used to pray for snow in the winter because the street wasn't paved. But if enough snow came and the trucks and cars went down it enough, then it got padded down and we could go down with our sleds. And we used to hope for that. But if it didn't, then we do it in our own driveway because we did have a slope down the driveway. So I was there, hardly left there, never went to kindergarten because that was only for the kids in town. And my mom taught me everything I needed to know. She got her button box out when she sewed, so we did sorting and we did counting and stuff like that. We used to pretend to wash clothes and iron with her. When she did it, we did it. Well, I did it. When she canned. We take all the different kinds of things, just growing around and pretend. And so we did everything. We mimicked her and did that kind of play that we normally would have. I can remember her taking hollyhock seeds and bringing them in the house, and we made glue. We never bought glue. We always made it out of flour and water. And she would give me paper and the glue and the hollyhock seeds and some other things, and we'd make pictures together and glue them on and do different things like that. So she did a lot of things with me as a child. But when I did go to school, it was in town. It was huge because I had to go on a big yellow school bus, which I went to a Catholic school. We always went to church every Sunday, but we went to one that was really far out in the country. But when I was starting to go to school, they built a new one, and so we were in a new parish, and so I got to go to a fairly new school and a brand new church. And it was a big deal because you went on the bus, and I hated it.
How old was you?
I was 6.5 when I started school.
And did you get on the bus on your own or with your brothers, sisters?
No, they were already in high school. But, well, were they in high school? 16. Yes, they were all in high school by the time I started. Yes, so I had to go on my own. But my father, because he's lovely, he went on to the bus committee with the sole purpose of having the bus come down our road. So that I can remember on cold winter days, I would be eating my breakfast and getting all my things ready, and my mom would be standing out. And in the summer, you couldn't do it because the trees were there, but she could look all the way up our road, which was quite long, and see the bus, because to turn the corner and stop, they always, by law, have to open their door and the lights flash. And she could see the flashing light, and she'd say to me, "The bus is coming," and then I'd run out and stand there, because it'd be so cold, you really wouldn't want to stand out too long. So, that was nice. And my sisters and brothers, who always had to walk to the end of the road to get the bus because they went to a different school really out in the country, thought that I was spoiled because I didn't have it as hard as they did. Typical older kind of a reaction to, Mom stands in the door for you. So there was that. I can remember vividly my second grade, which would be my second year in school, when I would have been 7 and 8. Lots of things happened that year. My oldest sister got married in April of that year. That was huge, that she was leaving home, and she had helped take care of me, really, because she's 12 years older. So she helped, and I used to call her Little Mama. So that was traumatic for me. It just turned 8, losing that sister to me. To my mind, I was losing her. I made my first communion, which is a big deal in the Catholic Church. It was a big deal for me, very important. But unfortunately, I also caught chickenpox that year. And 2 weeks later, after I got back from school with that, I got the measles. And it was right during the time I should have made my first communion. And I remember the sister actually my teacher called my mother up, and I could hear her on the phone saying, "I can't do that. I'm afraid she's really very, very ill." And I think a lot of the kids had what today would be called German measles, but my mom called 9-day measles. You had 3 days coming, 3 days with them, and 3 days getting better, some such thing. I had what she called hard measles, and I was really, really ill. I couldn't have any light in the room. And as I was getting better, I can remember the doctor told her that she was to sit me outside so I could get some air, but I had to wear sunglasses, I had to have a big hat on, and I had to be wrapped in a blanket. And I still, to this day, have trouble with my eyes because the light really bothers them. I tend to wear sunglasses a lot. So I was really ill, and I missed my first communion. So I was devastated, absolutely devastated. We'd gotten, all year long, the build-up in religion class was towards making your first communion. So my sisters had given me as a gift a statue of Mary, which they gave me on the day I should have made my first communion. And a few weeks later, the priest said that we could. There were 4 of us who were sick and couldn't make it, and they said we could make it on this whatever Sunday it was. And my dad went to bat for me again because they said we would just, because the big deal, as I was growing up, the old-fashioned Catholic Church, people who weren't priests or altar boys, mind you, not girls, were never allowed on the altar. But at your first communion, you were allowed to, they actually took that away, and you were allowed to go up. And the priest was saying that we would just be at the communion rail. And my dad went up and he said, no, they will not. They will all get to go up like every other child and make their first communion up at the main part of the altar. So the pastor gave in, and he said yes. And so we got to go. And the wonderful thing is that there was a young man in our parish who had just become a priest, and he was having his first Mass at our parish, and the church was completely filled with flowers for this huge event, which, of course, for us meant that it was a lovely, we only usually just have a couple bouquets, but we had flowers everywhere, and I can remember that so vividly that it was like a little bonus for having had to wait. So it was important.
What was your school like? Was it strict?
School. It depended on which teacher you had. I didn't like school in first grade, and it wasn't because the teacher was strict. I think it was because I was 6 and a half and I was used to being at home with my mother, and quite frankly, I didn't have anybody else around that was my age to play with in all that time. So I was quite used to being with my older brothers and sisters. Well, my sisters, my brothers had both left home already. They went in the Navy. So I didn't really know them, actually. I knew I had brothers, and that was it. But I was used to having my older sisters around, and I was quite content to do things with them. But I can remember the first day, my family called me Betty. And I liked Betty, but for some reason I was insistent to my mother. I said, don't put that down on any forms. Put down Elizabeth. So she wouldn't, but you don't know that as a kid, do you? And I'm saying, make sure you write Elizabeth. And this girl with long curly hair, and me with long curly hair, and she said to me, what's your name? And I said, Elizabeth. And she said, Elizabeth? She said, that's way too big. And I said, what do you mean? She said, everyone has a nickname. What's your nickname? And I thought, I don't want them calling me Betty. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't have a nickname. And she said, your nickname should be Liz if your name's Elizabeth. And I thought, Liz? Now, actually, I like that. I said, yeah, that's my nickname. I'm Liz. And I've been Liz ever since, except to my family where I'm all still Betty. So I'm Aunt Betty to tons of kids, but in my head, I'm Liz. So we are still friends, that girl and I, Jo Sousa. She now lives in a different state, but still over there. And we talk all the time on Facebook and Messenger and things like that. And we're still excellent friends, even though politically we are not on the same page.